So, good day everyone. So, I am Justin Malonzo, the reporter in chapter 11. So, our topic is all about the revolution in 1896. So, introduction. By 1896, there were concrete and objective conditions in the economy, society, and the governance that justify revolution at the time of the Katipunan. The people, however, not totally united. The wealthy and the educated class was divided on the issue of independence and the use of force to obtain it. It was the masses, mostly the poor, less educated, and illiterate, led by the Katipunan, who were ready. Unfortunately, the conflict over leadership inside the Katipunan, the elite versus the non-elite, caused the rift that resulted in the tragic death of Bonifacio, founder and leader of the armed revolution. Ironically, it was the martyrdom of Rizal who had disengaged himself from the actual plan of the Katipunan that led to the downfall of Spanish rule in the Philippines. The poet Cecilio Apostol expressed it well. Que si una bala distorso to craneo, to idea en cambio, ditorio an imperio. Though a bullet pierce or destroy your skull, your idea destroy an empire. From here, despite the tragedy in Cavite, the lack of arms and losses of many lives, the Filipino fought vigilantly towards freedom and independence of the nation yet to be born. So back in 1896, the Katipunan was discovered and built. The Katipunan, whose being led by Andres Bonifacio, was an organization whose primary goal is to conduct a revolution. At first, the Katipunan failed because of the lack of unity among the people involved in it. So, table of contents. So, first, the condition before the revolution. Second, the fighting begins. Third is the Rizal execution. Fourth, the execution of Bonifacio. And lastly, the Biak na Bato Republic. So, first is the condition before the revolution. Late in 1895, when Bonifacio was busy propagating the political ideals of the Katipunan in many towns around Manila, some Spanish authorities were already suspecting a brewing unrest related to an underground society whose purpose was to end the Spanish rule. It was also rumored that the weapons came from Hong Kong and Yokohama. So persistent were the rumors that the Governor-General, in order to mollify the farers, ordered the banishment of some prominent citizens of Batangas and Bulacan. The farers' suspicion were correct all along. Undoubtedly, there were general dissatisfaction among the Filipinos. Money was difficult to get. Very few Filipinos were gainfully employed, while there was no starvation. The life of the people was far from prosperous. The common people were suffering from heavy taxation, from abusive farers and civil authorities, and from lack of economic opportunities, while the government was spending millions of pesos from the army and navy. The amount being spent for public improvement was pitifully small. The personal honor and dignity of the Filipinos were taken for granted. They were physically maltreated in the public places like Guam, Hulu, and Palawan on suspicions of committing crimes, even petty ones. The institution of forced labor provided opportunities from rampant abuse of Filipinos by Spaniards. For 300 years, the Filipinos suffered these abuses in silence. However, the seeds of hatred had been planted in their hearts, even when outwardly they say smiling and saying, "Si, Señor," to every command of a Spaniard. So in 1895, Bonifacio took the lead to prepare before the revolution. They prepared so much and gathered so many people to take part of the sad movement. It took them quite some time to fix everything and to finally do the revolution against Spaniards. So next, the discovery of the Katipunan. Father Mariano Hill was the Spanish curate of Tondo, province of Manila. He was one of the pharaohs who had earlier warned the Spanish civil authorities about the existence of a secret society. He informed the police authorities that this society, with the aim to kill all the Spaniards in the country, had been recruiting members, but the Spanish civil authorities did not listen to him until a katipunero by the name of Teodoro Patiano came to see him one afternoon. Father Mariano Hill immediately rushed to the headquarters of the Manila police and informed the officers regarding Patino's revolution. In the printing shop of the daily newspaper, Diario de Manila, Father Hill, the police, and the owner of the newspaper found some Katipunan receipts and other pieces of evidence pointing to the existence of the secret society. So the discovery of the Katipunan was because of Father Mariano Hill. He was the pharaoh who warned the Spaniards about the said movement and its aim, which is to kill and take revenge against them. So next is the city of the Pugadlawin. Francisco L. Rojas, a Spaniard born in the Philippines, who considered this country as his own, was asked to support the society. He was a millionaire who belonged to a family that owned vast tracts of lands and put up the San Miguel Brewery. When he heard about the Katipunan, he got angry and threatened to tell the police about it. Many wealthy Filipinos refused to help the Katipunan, with few exceptions like the physician Dr. Pio Valenzuela. Bonifacio wanted the wealthy Filipinos to help finance the Katipunan in its struggle to free the country from Spain. He ordered some of his trusted men to approach the rich Filipinos and ask the contribution to the society. In spite of a refusal by the wealthy Filipinos to help the Katipunan, Bonifacio and his men did not lose hope. When the Katipunan was discovered in August 19, Bonifacio was in Caloocan with his wife, Gregoria de Jesus, fearing that he might be arrested if he remained in Caloocan. Bonifacio decided to move to Balintawak. He ordered his runners to inform all Katipuneros that there would be a meeting in Balintawak on August 24. Accompanied by 4 men, Bonifacio reached Balintawak at midnight of 21, and in the afternoon about 500. A part of Balintawak and arrived at the next sitio called Pugadlawin the following day. So lack of enough resources was the problem they faced alongside the movement. They asked many rich Filipinos to somehow support them financially. And luckily, a Spaniard born in the Philippines named Francisco L. Marcos supported them. But after hearing the goals of the Katipunan, many rich Filipinos refused to help them. But despite of those, they become more determined. They met a lot of people who eventually became a part of the movement. So next, the fighting begins. Bonifacio advised his men to retreat to another sitio called Pasong Bato. On August 25, some women notified Bonifacio that civil guards and infantrymen were coming. The Katipuneros deployed themselves and deliberately fell to the ground to avoid being hit. A short skirmish ensued in which one civil guard and two Katipuneros were killed. The Spaniards and their hired Filipino soldiers, thinking that the rebels were strong, retreated. The rebels believed their weapons were inferior to those of the civil guard, also retreated towards Balara. From here, they proceeded to Marikina and on to Hagdang Bato. On August 28, Bonifacio issued a manifesto telling the people to take up the Filipinos' cause. He also set the attack on the city of Manila for August 29, 1896. He ended his manifesto by saying that anybody who obstructs this sacred idea of the Philippine people will be considered a traitor and an enemy. Bonifacio ordered his men to attack the arsenal located at San Juan del Monte. A fighting broke out between the attacking Filipinos forces and the defending Spanish soldier on August 30, 1896. After some time, fraud between the Katipuneros and Spaniards accrues. At the first, the battle became tough. Spaniards and the Katipuneros fought their lungs out until one of them gave up. Spaniards drove them while Bonifacio had heavily losses. So next is the martial law. The revolutionary flame was rapidly spreading to another province of Central Luzon and Southern Tagalog province of Cavite, Laguna, and Batangas. Governor General Ramon Blanco issued a decree on August 30 to prevent the spreading of the revolution. The first 8 provinces which rose in arms Cavite, Manila, Laguna, Batangas, Bulacan, Pampanga, Tarlac, Nueva Ecija were placed under martial law. The decree further provided that those who would surrender within 48 hours after the publication of the decree would not be tried by the military court. This policy, known as Blanco's policy of attraction, was intended to win over the Filipinos to the side of the government and thus end the rebellions. Some Filipinos, among them Dr. Pio Valenzuela and a few of his companions, took advantage of this provision and surrendered to the government. So, because of the chaos caused by the Katipuneros and Spaniards, the Governor General placed a lot of cities to a martial law. This law was being implemented to minimize the damage that the revolutionary flame had brought. A lot of cities suffered because of the sudden declaration of the martial law. So the persecution continues. The colonial government continued its policy of repressions to cow the people into silence. The suspects in Manila and the province were punished without trial. Head of families were shipped to the Carolines in the Pacific and the Spanish penal colony in Africa. Fort Santiago was packed with hundreds of prisoners, most of whom were innocent. Many died when the waters of the Pasig River entered the lower portion of the cell, while others died of suffocation. In some places, like Bulacan, the Spaniards massacred many people. Men were tortured to force them to tell on their friends and even relatives. On September 4, 1896, 4 Katipuneros were executed in Bagumbayan Field, which is now a part of the Rizal Park in Manila. On January 4, 1897, the Spaniards executed 12 Bicolano Patriots, and in Calibo, which was then part of Capiz. 19 patriots were also shot to death. So while the reign of terror is still spreading out, the government put out heavier on more strict rules. Lots of people was being imprisoned, and some of them were being transferred to some other places. So next is the execution of Rizal. He was executed by the Spanish colonial government for the crime of rebellion. His advocacies for reform in the Philippines under the hands of Spanish colonial authorities led to his early death at the age of 36. He was executed in Bagumbayan, now called Luneta, in Manila on December 30, 1896. The height of Spanish brutality in the Philippines came when the government ordered Rizal trial and execution. Rizal had been in Dapitan, Zamboanga del Norte since 1892. He had lived there peacefully, helping the people in their work. In 1896, he asked the government to allow him to go to Cuba to serve as a military surgeon. The Cubans then were fighting for their independence from their Spanish master. Rizal's request was granted. So from Dapitan, he was brought to Manila Bay, where he waited for a steamer that would take him to Cuba by way of Spain. He was in a Spanish cruiser in Manila Bay when the revolution broke out. He refused to be rescued when revolutionaries offered to save him. He transferred to the steamer when it arrives in Manila. He was imprisoned in Fort Santiago, and later he was tried as a traitor to Spain. Rizal defended himself with the help of a Spanish military lawyer. He strongly denied any connection with the Katipunan and the plan to topple the government. He explained that since his exile in Dapitan, he had stopped any political involvement with groups, but the military court did not listen to his arguments. He was sentenced to be shot to death. His parents, brothers, sisters appealed to the Governor-General for pardon, but the governor refuses to grant their request. Rizal was executed early in the morning of December 30, 1896. His execution did not dishearten the revolutionaries. On the contrary, they resolved to fight to the bitter end. Rizal's execution, in fact, emboldened the Filipinos to fight for their country and its independence. So in 1896, Rizal's execution took place. Some Spaniards ordered him to make his way to Cuba to be a military surgeon. While he's on his way to Cuba, the revolution broke out. He wanted to go back to Manila, and there he was imprisoned and accused of being a traitor to Spain. He tried to defend himself in the court, but the court did not even bother to listen to his side. He was executed early in the morning on December 30, 1896. So next is the execution of Bonifacio. On May 10, 1897, Andres Bonifacio, the father of the Philippine Revolution and founder of the Katipunan, and his brother Procopio were executed in the mountains of Maragondon, Cavite by the General Emilio Aguinaldo's men for being guilty of treason and sedition. Bonifacio goes to Cavite. Meanwhile, in Cavite, Emilio Aguinaldo, the young mayor of the town of Kawit, led the rebels against the Spaniards. He won victory after victory, and the people, admiring his qualities as a military leader, called him General Miyong. His famous victory was in Imus when he defeated the Spanish army contingent under the command of General Ernesto de Aguilar on September 5, 1896. Aguinaldo took his sword and kept it as a momentum of his victory. Katipunan ng Cavite was divided into two factions, the Magdiwang and the Magdalo. Bonifacio was requested to go to Cavite to mediate between the factions. Accompanied by his wife and two brothers, Bonifacio arrived in Cavite towards the end of December 1896. An assembly was held in Imus on December 31, 1896, to determine whether the Katipunan should be transformed into another body with governmental powers. The Magdiwang favored the retention of the Katipunan, while the Magdalo favored a change in the Katipunan structure. So in Cavite, Emilio Aguinaldo took the lead to rebels against the Spaniards. Luckily, he won a couple of times against them. The Katipunan in Cavite was divided into two fractions, the Magdiwang and the Magdalo, which later caused several defeats of the revolutionaries. They then request Bonifacio to mediate the Katipunan there. So the Tejeros Convention. So the Spanish army was trying its best to subjugate Cavite, when it was now a major battleground of the revolution. Town after town fell into the hands of the Spaniards. Faced with this bitter fact, the rebels decided to meet at Tejeros, San Francisco del Malabon, now General Trias. So later on, Cavite became a major ground for both Katipuneros and Spaniards. They defeated town by town and took control of it. During the convention, they decided to create new set of officials. Bonifacio was then being proclaimed as the Director of Interior. Daniel Tirona, a member of the faction Magdalo, protests that the position doesn't suit Bonifacio. Bonifacio was angry about the sudden protest and quickly took his gun out and pointed it directly to Tirona, but Ricarte held his hand. He said that the decision was null and void. So that's all my topic.